بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده تعالى ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our reading of the book Kitab Tawhid of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul rahimahullah, alongside the explanation of Allama ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, Al-Qawl al-Mufid fi Sharh Kitab Tawhid, we stopped on the chapter in regards to sacrificing in a place where sacrifice is made for other than Allah. So the chapter we're looking at has a connection to the chapter we covered last week in regards to slaughtering for other than Allah. And we established last week that it's not permissible to slaughter for other than Allah, as Allah has commanded us that slaughtering is ibadah. And ibadah belongs to Allah. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Only pray to Allah and only slaughter for Him. And Allah said subhanahu wa ta'ala, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that my prayer and that my slaughtering and that my living and my death is all for Allah, Lord of the worlds. And other proofs like this, and we also connected to that there is no prohibition for slaughtering for guests or for hunger, as that falls under the ruling of slaughtering for Allah. And this chapter has now to do with slaughtering the places where other than Allah, where slaughter is made for other than Allah. So Babun, chapter, لا يذبح لله ولا يذبح لله بمكان يذبح فيه لغير الله. So the chapter is that it's not permissible to slaughter for Allah in places where other than Allah is being slaughtered for. So chapter, لا يذبح لله, it's not permissible to slaughter for Allah بمكان, in a space or a place, يذبح فيه لغير الله, in which in that place other than Allah is slaughtered for. So the Shaykh al-Islam, he brings the first verse. Allah, he says subhanahu wa ta'ala, لا تقم فيه أبدا, never stand you therein. Surah Tawbah, ayah 108. So Shaykh al-Islam begins and says the transition of the author, rahimahullah, is of the most appropriately possible. Means the way that he transitions last chapter to this chapter is excellent. In that the previous chapter, he discussed slaughtering for other than Allah. He rejected this action for other than Allah. But here, he mentions slaughtering for Allah, but at a place where slaughtering is made for other than Allah. As he makes the sacrifice for Allah at a place where sacrifices are made for idols. So here, the first benefit we learn is that the chapter order, the tartib, the ordering of the chapter, the Shaykh al-Islam, is a very precise and very beneficial manner. So last chapter to do with the ruling of slaughtering for other than Allah. This chapter to do with slaughtering for Allah in a place where other than Allah is slaughtered for. So here also, Shaykh al-Uthaymeen's teacher, Imam al-Sa'di, he commented in his explanation of Kitab Tawhid. Shaykh Abdul bin Nasir al-Sa'di, rahimahullah, he has an explanation of Kitab Tawhid likewise. It's called Qawl al-Sadid. So he said, rahimahullah, there he mentioned that the chapter that we mentioned last week, and this chapter, the ordering is excellent. Why? The last chapter we covered had to do with the issue of the maqasid, the purposes of slaughtering. Whereas this chapter we're dealing with the wasa'il, the means of slaughtering. So the connection there is very good. Last week we looked at the maqasid. What's the intent of slaughtering for other than Allah or slaughtering for Allah? So then we learned last week you can only slaughter for Allah. Now we're looking at the wasa'il, the means. If you're slaughtering for Allah, can we slaughter in a place where other than Allah is slaughtered for? So we see then the ordering of the chapters is very good. Shaykh al-Islam is very precise in the manner of his chapter headings. Shaykh Imam Sa'di, he mentions that in his sharh of Kitab Tawhid, Qawl al-Sadid, page 36. And I believe that the Kitab itself also has been translated. He says it is not permissible. Ibn Uthaymeen says it is not permissible to slaughter in that location because it constitutes apparent conformance with the idolaters. And perhaps shaitan may suggest an evil intention in a person's heart. And so he believes that sacrifice at that location is even more virtuous than things like that. And this is dangerous. So the reason why we're not allowed to slaughter in the places where slaughter is made for idols or on altars and things of this is because somebody may later on believe in his heart that this evil that he's doing, shaitan might confuse them and trick them into believing that it's virtuous to do slaughter in this area. And then forgetting that, it's actually a place of shirk. And it's very important that we will learn later on that we're not supposed to be befitting, it's not befitting to visit those kind of places where shirk and ma'asi is taking place in the first place. So the benefit is, the wisdom why we're not allowed to slaughter in places where there is shirk is that shaitan may mislead us and may come to someone's heart and make them believe that slaughtering in such a location is virtuous. So Shaykh al-Islam brings the ayah to establish this, لَا تَقُمْ فِيهِ أَبَدًا. Allah says, do not stand you therein ever. What is the ayah talking about? It's talking about the missing pronoun refers to Masjid al-Dirar. Masjid al-Dirar. Now what's Masjid al-Dirar? Right, the mosque of prejudice, or the Masjid of prejudice, of Masjid of division. This is referring to an event in the Seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which the Munafiqun, the hypocrites, they established a masjid, and they established a masjid not for Allah's sake, but to create discord and division amongst the Muslimin. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He advised in Surah Tawbah not to pray in that masjid. Allah says in Surah Tawbah, He says, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مَسْجِدًا ضِرَارًا وَكُفْرًا وَتَفْرِيقًا بَيْنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَإِرْصَادًا لِمَنْ حَارَبَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. As for those who put up a mosque as a way of harm and disbelief, and to disunite the believers, and as an outpost for those who wage war against Allah, His Messenger, until the end of the verses. This is in Surah Tawbah, ayah 107. So this masjid was called Masjid Dirar, the masjid of prejudice or harm. And what is intended here is that the hypocrites did this not for Allah. But we know we're supposed to build the houses of Allah for Allah. Man bana baytan lillah, whoever builds a house for the sake of Allah, bana Allahu baytan fil Jannah. Allah will build him a house in Jannah. They didn't build the house for Allah. This is built for division. Allah says, وَكُفْرًا وَتَفْرِيقًا بَيْنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Disbelief and division and discord between the believers. So Shaykh Uthaymeen, he says, rahimahullah, those who founded it were hypocrites. And their aims were, number one, to put Quba masjid at detriment. Thus it was called Masjid Dirar. So the masjid in reference to here, that they tried to divide the people from Masjid al-Quba, right? And there is some discussion which masjid is it? Is it Masjid al-Quba? Is it Masjid al-Rasul that they were trying to divide people from? Shaykh Uthaymeen says here, Masjid al-Quba, that they were trying to divide people from there, and that's why it was referred to as the masjid of prejudice or harm. And that's because the ayah mentions that we shouldn't pray in such a masjid, but rather in the masjid أُسِّسَ عَلَى تَقْوَى مِنْ أَوَّلِ يَوْمٍ. The masjid that was built upon taqwa from day one, أَحَقًّا تَقُومُ فِيهِ. It has no right to stand in that masjid. So here, number two, the disbelief in Allah, because kufr was established in it, and will be established in it. And the refuge is with Allah, since hypocrites were its founders. So the second point is that disbelief will be established in such a masjid, not the Tawhid of Allah, not the Iman in Allah. Number three, to cause dissension among the believers, for instead of making one or two rows of salah in Masjid al-Quba, only a half row will be made while the rest will be in other masjid. And the Sharia encourages togetherness of the Muslims. So the third benefit is that it's going to create distinction and division. So for example, one or two rows of Muslims will pray in Masjid al-Quba. Due to this masjid, only half a row will be established in prayer there. And that is not allowed. Islamic calls to togetherness and unity, not for division and discord. The fourth is a way to a safe hold for those who oppose Allah and His Messenger. Means part of the reason why they built the masjid was إِرْسَادًا لِمَنْ حَارَبَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. They built it as a way for a safe hold, as a safe ground for those who oppose Allah and His Messenger. So Shaykh Uthaymeen says it was a reference to a man named Abu Amir, who said there was a man called Abu Amir who was a deviant, and he traveled to Sham and began to exchange correspondence with the hypocrites who founded such a masjid. And so they set up the masjid on his advice so that he would be able to gather in it, or they would be able to gather in it, to make evil plots against Allah and against the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions. So Allah says, وَلِيَحْلِفُنَّ إِنْ أَرَدْنَا إِلَّا الْحُسْنَى. And they will indeed swear that they only intend nothing but good. Surah Tawbah, ayah 107, but that's not the case. The Shaykh says this is the way of the hypocrites. They make false oaths. And we know that they always would swear by Allah, they only want this, they only intend that. Allah yashhadu inna al-munafiqeen lakadibun. Allah already bear witness of the munafiqun and liars. So here, the point is that this is the fourth benefit. The reason why it's prohibited is because it was supposed to be a safe hold, safe grounding for those who oppose Allah and His Messenger, to make plots, to attack or to harm the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and the companions radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. And the Shaykh says, Allah says, Wallahu yashhadu innahum lakadibun. Allah bear witnesses that they are certainly liars. Surah Tawbah ayah 107, the same verse. So Allah the Exalted declared that they were lying, owing to that they held in their minds what they held in their hearts, and that was only known to the knower of the unseen. Is that it is as if what they concealed in their hearts with respect to Allah is something clearly seen with the eyes. Wallahu yashhadu inna al-munafiqeen lakadibun. And Allah bear witness that the hypocrites are indeed liars. So the verse here, لا تقم فيه أبدا, do not stand in there. Therein, here is la of negation. Taqum, his imperative. And what is intending here by this statement, Shaykh says evidence for it being in imperative mood. But what we benefit from this, Shaykh, after mentioning the Arabic benefit, he mentions here that such a masjid never is indication that the mosque will remain as a mosque of hypocrisy. And so, verily the mosque's foundation was laid from the first day on piety. That's the masjid Allah says you should stand therein. Ussisa ala taqwa, the one that's built upon the taqwa, that's the one you pray in. So the point here of this is that we learn that such a masjid was built upon disbelief, hypocrisy, all of these evils. So due to that, we're not allowed to stand in it. So what's connection between this and the chapter is that the chapter is teaching us that the places where shirk is being committed by slaughtering for other than Allah, we're not allowed to slaughter in it. The same way we're not allowed to pray in a masjid which is built upon hypocrisy and disbelief, because it's established for other than Allah. So we cannot go there and try to, or we shouldn't go there and try to establish the salah for Allah in places which were built for other than Allah. So the Shaykh is connecting these two ayat, or this ayat to this point. Then the Shaykh continues discussing more about this incident that occurred. And I want to comment a bit on this. What exactly is the definition of masjid dirar? So when we look at this term, for sure we know, as the ayah mentions in Surah Tawbah ayah 107, the masjid dirar was the masjid that the munafiqeen they built during the time of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But it's not limited to that only. It's not limited to that. So the ulama, they mentioned, some of them, that the masjid dirar actually can refer to any place in which disobedience or disbelief is done there, and it's designed to do the same thing the masjid dirar was designed to do, which is to create discord, division, and unity. Imam al-Qurtubi, he mentions in his tafsir, rahimahullah, our ulama, our scholars have said, every masjid built upon harm, or riyah, showing off, to be seen, or sum'ah, to be heard, then it takes the ruling of masjid dirar. Our ulama have said, every masjid built upon harm, or riyah, showing off, to be seen, or sum'ah, to be heard, then it takes the ruling of masjid al-dirar, and it's not allowed to pray in it. So there's Imam Qurtubi showing us the ta'rif, the definition of masjid dirar is more spacious than that one masjid that they had. And he mentions this in his Tafsir al-Qurtubi, volume 8, page 254. So he said, our ulama, our scholars have said this is what masjid dirar includes. Every masjid which is built for harm, riyah, showing off openly, showing to be seen, or sum'ah, trying to do action to be heard, all that they takes the ruling masjid dirar. Imam al-Sa'di in his tafsir, he expands it more. He says, every condition, every hala, every condition which leads to differing between the believers, then it is disobedience, which is specifically to be left off and must be specifically left off and removed. So while we understand masjid dirar as a place like it's built on the similar grounds, he says more than that, any condition, any situation in which difference between the Muslims occurs, then this is considered disobedience, which is specifically prohibited. Why? He says because The reason for this is because they took Masjid Dirar. The only reason why they took it as masjid was due to this reason, to create division. So due to this intent, it became prohibited. So it's not just even a masjid. You can even do any situation in which there's going to be discord between the believers and disunity, then it's like Masjid Dirar. It's not permissible. But Allah doesn't allow us, didn't order us to divide. وَلَا تَكُونُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. Allah says, and do not be like the polytheists. Right? They were the ones who split up their religion into sects and groups. Each of them pleased with that which they have. So it's not allowed to be divided. It's opposite. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْدِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Allah ordered us all to hold fast to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. So very important here that we understand that Masjid Dirar can also be expanded to any hala, situation, or masjid that's built upon harm or riya and likes of this. طيب. Shaykh Uthaymin, he continues then, and he mentions that Masjid Dirar was established for sin. This belief is causing dissension amongst the Muslims. It's on page 241. And Allah prohibited His Messenger from standing in it for prayer, even though his prayer therein is for Allah. This proves that one should avoid every place where Allah is disobeyed. Although the mosque was set aside for salah, it is a place of sin. So the prayer should not be observed in there. So here Shaykh Uthaymin extracts the ruling that this proves that one should avoid every place where Allah is disobeyed. So we learn now. Allah said, لَا تَقُمْ فِيهِ. What was that place? Allah says, don't stand in. It's a masjid. So therefore, it's even more. Any place where disobedience is can be committed, we're not supposed to be there. We're not supposed to go into such places. Likewise, if someone wants to slaughter in a location where slaughtering is made for Allah, for other than Allah, such is forbidden owing to it being similar to prayer in the masjid of prejudice. Similar to this is the prohibition of observing prayers during sunrise and sunset, because they are periods which idolaters, mushrikeen, prostrate to Allah, prostrate to the sun. This is with respect to time and period, where the hadith is cited as authors in relation to location. So we get a benefit that if a place, you're slaughtering in a place where people slaughter for other than Allah, is similar to praying in Masjid Dirar, where you pray for Allah, but people have built it and they done it for other than Allah. It means the masjid based on disbelief and hypocrisy. For you praying for Allah in there is not permissible, even though you're praying for Allah. The same way, we cannot slaughter for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in places where other than Allah are being slaughtered, for that is not allowed. Likewise, we see a prohibition in praying during sunrise and sunset, the very time Hadith Muslim and others. The Messenger ﷺ prohibited, as he mentioned, that the sun rises between the two horns of shaitan, and that every disbeliever who worships the sun, they make prostration at that time to it. And we find that also sun worship is something that was mentioned in the story of Sulaiman and Bilqis, that they were worshipping, their people worshipping the sun. They were prostrating to the sun besides Allah. So we see here the prohibition. The Prophet ﷺ said you're not allowed to pray at those times. Why? Because if we pray for Allah, making sujood at that time, sujood is ibadah. And everybody else who prostrate at that time is those sun worshippers who was prostrating for other than Allah. We will be resembling their situation. Even though we say, I'm doing for Allah, they're doing for other than Allah. But the time is the same. We're not supposed to resemble it. And so we benefit from that as well. Even though sujood is ibadah, at that time we're not supposed to. Allah says, كَلَّا لَا تُطِعْهُ وَاسْجُدْ وَاقْتَرِبْ. Nay, make prostration to Allah, draw near. فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوهُ. Prostrate to Allah and worship Him. Sujood is ibadah. So, but if you do it at that time, you resemble them. مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. And we know this hadith, whoever resembles the people is like them. So Sharia has come and said, no, we can't do salah at that time. You have to wait for the sun to rise, then we can pray our nawafil. For the sun to set, then the adhan is called, then we do our prayer for our maghrib. So these two hadiths Shaykh quoting instance are in relation to zaman, time. But the chapter is in relation to the makan, the place. One benefit before we get into the hadith in relation to this, what happened to Masjid Dirar? Many of the ulama, they mention in their books of hadith, and the books of seer, and the books of fiqh, the Prophet ﷺ ordered the Masjid Dirar be burnt down. Many of the ulama mention that the Prophet ﷺ he ordered the Masjid Dirar be burnt down. Now this is something quite common. Many ulama they mention. Whether it be right, Ibn al-Qayyim, or many of them they mention this, and even the books of fiqh. However, in relation to the actual narration, that there is no authentic narration that actually proves that such an occurrence occurred. Even though it's often cited. And Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, he mentions, and he's checking at the book Minar al-Sabil, his Kitab al-Gharil, he says that under the narration I mentioned that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam had Masjid Dirar burnt down. He says I could not find an authentic chain or narration to prove this. And he mentions that al-Gharil, hadith number 1531. So even though it's often cited, the narration is not authentic to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are some marasil, some mursal narrations, but as an actual authentic narration, wallahu ta'ala alam. But the many ulama mentioned this, so you may come across that in the books of seerah or the books of fiqh, or you'll find the ulama say that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked for it to burn down. And why is it? Some people may be confused. How can the Rasul say to burn it down when Allah prohibits for us to burn masajid and places of worship in Surah Al-Hajj? That says, وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ, it wasn't for Allah's bounty, Allah's mercy. لَهُدِّمَ السَّوَامِعُ, Allah says many of the synagogues and the masajid and the churches were burnt down or destroyed. And the ulama would argue, many of them, that the reason why this occurred, because the Masjid Dirar wasn't for Allah, and it wasn't a masjid, it was designed for prayer, and it was also designed for harm. Right? And some obviously will argue that even that is disputable if he burnt it down in the first place. Right? So some they explain that the harm of this masjid necessitated for it to be burnt, to be destroyed, for it goes against the very maqasid of the deen, right? The division against the Muslims. And others will argue, obviously, that perhaps the narration is not authentic, wallahu ta'ala adam, but you might find this in many books. I do mention it, so we are mentioning likewise too, as a benefit. Continuing now, the Shaykh gets into the chapter by mentioning the next hadith. Shaykh al-Islam quotes the hadith from Thabit bin Dhahak radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who said, a man made a vow to sacrifice a camel at a place known as Buwana, and asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about it. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam inquired, saying, was there any of the idols of the days of ignorance which used to be worshipped there? They answered, no. He asked further, did any of their festivals used to hold there? They replied, no. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said, keep your vow, for there is no keeping of a vow in in disobedience to Allah, or in what a person does not own. Reported by Abu Dawud, as chain of transmission is according to the conditions of both of them, means Bukhari or Muslim. The hadith is sahih. So this hadith is the first hadith that the Shaykh is going to use, if not the clearest of the hadith, in proving that we're not allowed to slaughter in such places. Because if you look at the hadith, the man here who came, he made an oath. And we're going to talk about, he made a vow. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him two important questions in relation to that place. And these two questions show us that it's not permissible to slaughter in places that other than Allah is slaughtered. The first, هل كان فيها وثن من أوثان الجاهلية يعبد? Is there any type of idol from the idols of Jahiliyyah, the pre-Islamic time period, the days of ignorance, which is worship? قالوا لا. They all said no. And the second question, هل كان فيها? Is there in there أعياد, those celebrations, عيد من أعيادهم, those celebrations from their celebrations, the festival of disbelievers? To which they answered no. So then the Messenger said you can do it. So here we learn the benefit, which is the Rasul asked those two questions, showing why that these two are important concern. If their answer was yes to them, we're not allowed to do it. It means that if they worshipped in the time of Jahiliyyah an idol there, we're not supposed to slaughter there. If they did festivals there, we're not supposed to do our festival or our ibadat there. So the first thing we look at now is the issue of nadar. So the hadith begins, we're talking about nadar, right? The word nadar. Where the hadith talks about a man making a vow. Now what is a vow? Right? This is a good question. Somebody asked. Shaykh Uthaymin said in the comment to the vow, nadar literally means obligation and promise. So the word nadar, the word nadar, it means translates to oath. It means to make a promise or obligation. Al-iltizam wal-ahd. This is what nadar means. Because the beginning hadith, nadar rajulun, a man made an oath. And he came to Rasul talking about this. So nadar means oath. So literally, it means an obligation or promise. Technically, Istilahi, it means a promise by the legally responsible person to do a thing, not basically obligatory for Allah. So it means somebody who is legally responsible, is mukallif, legally responsible in Sharia. He promises to do something which is not wajib for the sake of Allah. So he is binding himself, he's obligating himself to do that action, even though it's not wajib in its origin. That's what nadar means. So you're telling yourself, you're making this vow, I will do something which is not wajib, and you're making wajib in yourself for Allah's sake. So it's not the wajibat. We're talking about something just, the ruling, its original ruling is not wajib, but you said, I will do it, I will stick to it. But for Allah, I'm going to do this. And so this is what it means. And it's very important we understand this because this chapter here also shows that there's rulings of fiqh connected to it. So some say, we have no need to restrict it to something not basically obligatory, and that if he vows to do something which is basically obligatory, such a vow is valid. Now upon that which the vow is made, it becomes obligatory from two angles, from the angle of vowing and from the angle of legislation. And the obligation of expiation would also follow if he breaks the vow. So here what Shaykh is saying is, some of the ulama argue that we don't have to say that he obligated something which is not wajib. He can even obligate on himself something already wajib. But then it will become more wajib. It means wajib from the angle of vowing, and wajib from the angle of ibad, shara. You have to do it. So nadar itself, it's not like halaf, right? Which is swearing or taking an oath. So there are two different things here. We have something called nadar, which translates as vow, and we have something called half. Half al-yamin or yamin, or this means swearing or taking an oath. And they're related, as Shaykh will get there. But the difference is, as Shaykh Matee mentioned in one of his other books, Mudhakkaratul Fiqh, he mentions that the word nadar itself, it doesn't come bisiqatul makhsusa. It doesn't have specified wordings. So the difference between these two, between a half, when you say an oath, versus a vow, is that the vow, it's more general. Whereas this, the other one, the oath, has specific wordings. Wallahi, Wallahi, or billahi, or tallahi. Whereas the nadar, you don't need those two wordings only. You can do more than that. So you can use more general in the way you do it. Ahad Allah, or wallahi alayya nadar, or any of these things. Shaykh says is open to many ways. So Mudhakkaratul Fiqh mentions that the word nadar, it has more ways. It's more space. It doesn't have that specified wording that you have to begin with. Whereas the halaf, we know those three letters. In Arabic vowing, wow, and ba and ta. But the issue is, when it comes to them, that's because sometimes we confuse, even in English we confuse too, nadar, or even in language we confuse the two. English, vow and oath, they all sound the same. But now we say nadar versus halaf. And we know it's ibadah. يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيلا. So Allah mentioned that. So many of us we covered, we see ومنه النظر. When Shaykh Islam mentioned from the ibadat is nadar. Then he mentioned the ayah. So nadar is ibadah, to make a vow only for Allah. But it's different than, slightly different than swearing or making an oath for Allah, which is considered half. Making sense here? What's the ruling on this? What's the ruling on nadar? Shaykh says basically, the basic ruling is disliked. The origin ruling on nadar is disliked. In fact, some of the people of knowledge have inclined towards prohibition. Why? Because you're obligating upon yourself something which Allah didn't obligate. That's something where, is it something mustahab to do? No, because maybe you obligate upon yourself something which you cannot do. It's too hard for you. Or something which is impossible to do, or a sin. That's what happens. Somebody make an oath, vow, or something haram. So we're going to get to that ruling, that doesn't count. So the ruling is disliked, some even said haram. And what's the proof? It's a hadith, Ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, where the Prophet ﷺ prohibited nadar. Naha Rasul ﷺ nadar. He prohibited it. And the prohibit or forbiddance means tahreem. Some ulama say prohibition. And Allah said no, it means karahiyah, dislike. And what benefit is it? Rasul said, إِنَّهُ or إِنَّهَا لَا يَأْتِي بِخَيْرٍ. It doesn't come with any khayr. Doesn't bring any good. Because if you're obligating something upon yourself which Allah didn't obligate, Allah already gave us obligation. So the Prophet said, لا يأتي بخير. It doesn't come with good. وإنما يستخرج به من البخيل. The only real benefit of another is that it makes a stingy person spend their money. Because if somebody's stingy and he made another, then he didn't fulfill it, what do you have to do? Expiate. So he has to give him his money. He's a bakhir. The bakhir doesn't like to spend. So from this angle, the bakhir has to spend because of another. That's the only khair it has in it. So what do you see in this hadith, Bukhari, Muslim, what is it teaching us? Right? That the asl is dislike. So we gotta know that from the get-go, because if you do make it, there's rules connected to it. But we see that, should we be making it? We see not so much. Now we see the asl dislike. Not that it's haram, but dislike. Because perhaps someone make a vow and then not be able to do it. And then put himself in a situation where they have to give expiation. Now, what if they cannot give expiation? So, it leads to other things. So now we benefit from that much. Then Shaykh continues said, also, because it is to bind oneself, it means obligatory upon yourself, something which Allah has freed him of, thereby placing additional obligation upon himself. And in addition, most of those who vow, they regret it. So many people who vow, they regret their vow. I should never have made the vow. And you will see them asking the scholars left and right about how to free themselves from the vow due to the difficulty and the burden. Especially when some of them rank a file that people do when they fall ill or when something that they need comes delayed. You find them making vows as if they believe that Allah will not grant them any favor except when they make this vow. So some people may be afflicted by calamity and they make vows. If Allah cures me, I will do this and this. I pass this test. 1,000 rak'at. So these are this, and then Allah grants him that, then you're in trouble now. So this is why it's important that the person himself shouldn't be in this kind of situation. Now that we mentioned this much, Shaykh now is going to get to the hadith where it talks about the man was promising, he made another, and yanhara ibanan. He wanted to slaughter an ibn. An ibn is a camel, he says. The plural, right? The word have no singular form. So a camel here, referring to this ibn, means a camel. And it says, but its singular meaning, you can also see ba'ir, right? And the place Buwana is mentioned, that he's actually made the oath to slaughter in this specific place called Buwana. So Buwana, it's a place, right? And it's a place that the people used to go to. So it was a known place. So he referenced this specific place he wants to do the oath. So Rasulullah asked him, was there any idols? And wathan, when we spoke about wathan, I don't remember, what's the difference between wathan and sanam? Because he talks about it again. The word wathan and sanam, in English we translate as idol and idol. Right? Two words for idol. But what's the difference? Anyone remembers between wathan and sanam? Okay.
Wathan is anything else besides Islam. Many other things. It's human.
Exactly. One of them has to do with, it has to be the form of the human. So Shaykh says here that when it comes to the wathan, it refers to all that is worshipped besides Allah. Right? Stone, tree, rock, any of this stuff. Where sanam is usually in the form of the human. Alhamdulillah. So now we know. Ahsan. So remember, this is a difference. And we mentioned the hadith of Adi bin Hatim radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And when one day he was wearing a golden chain, a cross. And he was a Jew, he was a Christian before he came to Islam. And Rasulullah told him, throw away hadith wathan. Throw from yourself this idol. So wathan can be in different forms. Sanam, usually human-like form. So here, Rasulullah asked him, هل كان فيها وثن من أوثان الجاهلية يعبد? Is there in there any idol from the idols of Jahiliyyah that's worship? Means any form it could be in. So it could be any form. And what does the word Jahiliyyah mean? As we mentioned before, in our lessons of Masail al-Jahiliyyah, the Jahiliyyah is a description to the people who were upon the message, right? The people who were upon whatever they were upon before the message of Rasulullah came. So they were called people of ignorance because they had ignorance. So Jahiliyyah refers to the time period, the Zaman, Qabl, al-Ba'ath, before the sending of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we also mentioned it can refer to كُلَّمَا خَالَفَ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَسُنَّةِ الرَّسُولِ sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anything and everything that opposes the book and the Sunnah is Jahiliyyah. So that's why we have to remember that Jahiliyyah in terms of Zaman, a time period, and Jahiliyyah that's more spacious. So the Rasulullah asked him, is there any idol from the idols of Jahiliyyah that's worshipped there? They said no. So worship, we know what worship means, that we mentioned before, and they answered no. So the question was a single person But since there were people with him, they answered, Sahaba, they answered together. Then he asked about the festival, the Eid. Now, what's the Eid? Eid refers to an event. It's an important definition of Eid. It refers to an event that recurs or happens repeatedly. So Eid is something that happens repeatedly. So Eid is something يعود, or it returns again and again. So it doesn't have to be like a festival. Like when we talk about festival, party, or hafla or something, that's not necessarily Eid. Eid can be just something, an event, or an action, or occurrence that happens again and again and again. As you see in the story of Isa alayhi salam, about the Ashab al-Ma'idah. When they asked Allah to bring the Ma'idah min as-Sama, they said, well, Allah grants him, we're going to make this day Eidan li-awwalina wa akhirina. We'll make this day an Eid. And what would mean then? Some meant that they would use that day. They always remember that day. Allah gave them that. Some other mentioned that they would even add to that fasting that particular day, whatever it may be. But specifying something means again and again they remember that day if Allah grants them that fadl. And then we have the Eid, another meaning that we know. Islamically, Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, Arafah, Jum'ah, these type of a'yad. Why? They happen every time. There's one for weekly, there's one this month, there's one the whole Sanawi, the whole year, like this. These are the Eids, because they keep coming. And then they have rulings. So Shaykh said, Al-Awd, right here, it refers to return. So the people of Jahiliyyah used to visit this place and take such a day as a festival, even if there were no idols in there. And he said, this is a place where they used to visit and just take as a festival. And Rasulullah said, no. This is also a side proof to show that we're not supposed to be going to the places where there is festivities of the disbelievers. Nor should we be partaking in it, nor should we be witnessing it. As Allah instructs us in the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَشْهَدُونَ الزُّورِ. The true believers, the Ibadur Rahman, are those, they don't witness zur. وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. And when they pass by vain, idle talk, they pass by honorably. So what's وَالَّذِينَ يَشْهَدُونَ الزُّورِ means? It means that you don't witness the festivals of disbelievers. So it's very important here. This ayah and this hadith are connected. Some asked that question, they said no. Means that even if there were no idols in it, they still cannot be going to a place where they are consistently frequenting as a festival. So thus the Prophet asked about two things, about shirk and the means to it, and he asked about also as regards to shirk, he was inquiring, was there any idols, and about the means he asked about the festivals. So he asked about shirk and the means to shirk, which is the festivals. So at the end of the hadith, when they answered in negative to both of them, the Rasul gave us now a principle. He said, Awfi bi nadharik, right? Which means, translates to, keep your vow. Awfi bi nadharik means, fulfill your vow. Why? Because when you make the vow, you have to fulfill it. So here's an order here, imperative verb, to do it. So does it imply its actual meaning of obligation, or does it imply permission? So what does it mean when he said this? Does it mean that, okay, you're permitted now to complete it, or does it you have to complete it? So Shaykh said in Monotheism, the answer is, it could imply permission, and as well, it could also imply obligation. As for slaughtering of the camel, it implies its actual meaning, and regarding location, it only implies permission. So here, specifically in regards to that camel, that man he vowed to slaughter, then it's wajib upon him not to slaughter it. As for slaughtering in such a location, then it's permissible now because they cleared that there's no shirk there and there's no festivals there. So what we benefit from this is that we have to keep our vows. We have to. So when you make a vow, the ruling is you keep it. As Allah says about the believers, يُوفُونَ بِالنَّذْرِ. They fulfill their vows. And Rasul ordered him, أَوْفِ بِنَذْرِكَ. Complete your vow. Now, Sharatim is going to continue in this regard. He says, if he were answered yes, he would have said, do not keep it. It means if they said yes to those two questions, or one of them, they will not be able, it doesn't have to do it now. And so here, keep your vow, is the Rasul teaching us now, Shaykh saying here, gave the reason for that by removing the preventatives or inhibition. And then Rasul told us two things where somebody doesn't have to keep his vow. Two situations where someone doesn't have to. The first one, Rasul said, فَإِنَّهُ لَا وَفَاءَ لِنَظْرٍ فِي مَعْصِيَةِ اللَّهِ. There is no vow in, or fulfilling vows in that which is disobedience to Allah. That's the first one. So if there's disobedience to Allah and the vow you made, you don't have to keep it. The second one, وَلَا فِي مَا لَا يَمْلِكُ ابْنَ آدَمٍ. And the second one, there is no keeping, fulfilling vows in that which you're not capable of doing. It's something you vow to do something which you're not even capable of doing. It's too much. So now we will know two situations. Time said we don't have to keep our vows. Number one, fi ma'asiyatillah. We know someone can obligate himself to do ma'asi. Inna Allah lam ya'murukum bil fahsha. Allah never ordered upon us fahsha. So somebody can't come and say, I'm going to obligate myself to do a sin. La ilaha illallah. You can't do that. La wafa fi ma'asiyatillah. Fi nadrin fi ma'asiyatillah wa la fi ma lam ya'murukum bil adl. Because if you cannot do it, you cannot do it. It's not possible. La yukallifu nafsan illa wus'aha. So these two show there are exceptions to this. So when we look at these two, we see a benefit here, which is, while making the vows, we have to make vows regarding things that we are not in disobedience. So vows must be always in things that are obedience to Allah, permissible. And they have to be in things which we are capable of doing. Now we know what we're supposed to be vowing on. Just in case somebody might be confused, what can I make a vow with? It has to be obedience to Allah. It has to be something you're capable of doing. So Shaykh now is going to expand on this before the end of the chapter. What are the rules in regards to the issue of vowing? So he mentions the points we just mentioned now. So the first one is, in regards to disobedience of Allah, means not possible to keep a vow in disobedience to Allah, says nearness cannot be sought towards Allah through sin. You can't obligate upon yourself something for Allah's sake. That's haram to draw near to Allah. It's impossible. Because why do you make another in the first place? Lillah. So you can't say, I'm going to obligate myself for Allah's sake by doing a sin Allah didn't permit. So it doesn't work like that. And then the Shaykh mentioned there's different categories of vows. So some vows there are that which we have to fulfill. So now he's going to give us the categorization of vows. The first is that which we have to fulfill. The vows which is wajib upon us to fulfill. And those are the vows which are in the obedience of Allah. Because Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, whoever makes a vow to obey Allah should obey Allah. It's as clear as it can get. Hadith Aisha, Hadith Bukhari. So as clear as it gets there. That we have to. If it's for the sake of Allah, obedience of Allah, we have to do it. So that's the first one. That which we have to do, because it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Man nadara an ya'asi Allah. That's coming after that. So the first one we know we have to do. Man nadara an yuti' Allah falyuti'hu. Whoever made an oath to obey Allah, a vow to obey Allah, you have to obey Him. Second one, that which is forbidden, the vow which you're not allowed to fulfill, because it is in the disobedience of Allah. The end of the hadith comes, وَمَنْ نَظَرَ, whoever makes an oath, أَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهِ, that he's going to disobey Allah, then he'll not disobey Allah. Let him not disobey Allah. Same hadith, Hadith Aisha. Then the third one, that which comes in the form of an oath. It is an allowed vow, and one is given the choice to keep it or atone for the oath. So the third one is the one which you do it by way of an oath, which is you're swearing by Allah that you're going to do something. So in that vow, you're vowing on yourself, swearing by Allah that you're going to do it. So in this one, you have a choice to do it or to expiate for it. And so you have between the two. You do it or you expiate. For example, Sheikh, if he makes a vow to wear a particular cloth, if he likes it, he may wear it, if he so desires, but he may not put it on. So if he doesn't want to wear it, he has to atone for the oath. Because you said you're going to, by Allah you will do it. So you have to make expiation, kafara. It's clear? The fourth one, when you make vows during arguments and anger. So while you're angry, or an argument. So it's named because anger and an argument usually leads to this kind of vow. Means people, they do this when they get angry. Right? They make this type, they make vows, So Shaykh says here then, the question is now, additionally it would imply an oath, an exhortation, prohibition, affirmation, denial. For example, he says such and such happened today. Another says it did not happen. And the other one says, if it did happen, I take an oath by Allah to fast for 1 year. So while they're arguing, the other one says, if it did happen, then I take an oath by Allah to fast for 1 year. So he made another in the argument. So the purpose of his vow here was to deny the other person who said that it didn't happen. So if it becomes clear that it actually happened, the one who made the vow has a choice to either fast for 1 year or make an atonement for what he said. Because he's broken his vow, right? And if he, the one who breaks his vow, gives the atonement for oaths. So here we see that a vow during the time of anger and dispute. So if it is as it occurred, then he has to either do his vow or he can expiate it. Same as the last category. The fifth one is to discourage vow. Keeping it is also dislike, and it attracts expiation for oaths when broken. So this is the fifth one, discourage vow. Sixth one, an ordinary vow, is that which is actually expressed as a vow, like saying, I make a vow upon myself for Allah. This also attracts the atonement, means expiation. As the Prophet ﷺ said, atonement for vow, which is not specified, is expiation for an oath. The last one is ordinary vow, which he actually expressed a vow, like saying, I make a vow upon myself for Allah, and it also attracts the oath. So Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he mentions in the hadith, كفارة النذر إذا لم يسم كفارة اليمين. So here what is intending here is an ordinary vow in which someone, he makes it general, but he doesn't specify exactly what he's vowing about. So now the matter comes, does a person like this, does he get into a sin or not? Or does a vow in itself a sin hold? The Shaykh says yes, it holds. As the Prophet said, whoever makes a vow to disobey Allah should not disobey him. If he had said whoever makes a vow to disobey Allah has no valid vow, such vows of sin would not have been valid. Therefore he's saying he should not disobey him contains proof that it holds, though he should not keep it. If he holds, he expiate. So now comes the khilaf. If someone said, I'm going to vow for something that's disobedience to Allah, is it count? If it counts, does he have to expiate? The Shaykh mentions here, after mentioning the khilaf, about the issue that there's two opinions on it. And if somebody made a vow in disobedience of Allah, is that a valid vow? Because from the vows, there's another that's sahih and the one that's fasid, the one that doesn't count. So here, he's mentioning here, the second opinion you have to discuss is also what is not, he says at the end here, after he discusses both sides, he said, therefore, its atonement is the same as that of the oath. The opinion is the most correct. So he says at the end, he concludes that yes, this person has to expiate. And the expiation is like that of the oath. So he makes a qiyas between the two. And he also looks at it from different angles. Because the Prophet didn't say that the person who made a vow to disobey Allah, that person doesn't have to expiate. He didn't say that. He kept silent about it. So the implication is that it's like any other oath. You make it, and you can't keep it, you have to expiate. Because if you say, I'm going to do something in disobedience of Allah, the argument is that you cannot do it in the first place. You have to expiate. Wallahu a'lam, it's a khilaf between the issue. But the point is that we learn that the oath, making a half, is similar to that of vowing. The last part of this chapter deals with the issue, and that which you're not capable of doing. So there's two ways of looking at this. مَا لَا يَمْلِكُ ibn Adam. So Shaykh says here, what it actually means, مَا لَا يَمْلِكُ ibn Adam, is that which a person doesn't own. That which a person doesn't own. So which a human being does not have ownership over. So first, that which he cannot do legally, such as if you were to say, by Allah, I'll emancipate the slave and so person. This is not valid because he doesn't have legal capacity to emancipate such a person. Secondly, what he cannot physically do, like if he says, by Allah, I will fly with my hands. So the meaning of the last part, فِيمَا لَا يَمْلِكُ ibn Adam, has two meanings. That which he cannot physically do, and that which he doesn't own. So for example, if he says, I'm going to free such and such person, a slave, who doesn't have power to do, then he can't do that. Or I will fly with my hands, and things of this imagination, which have no value or ability. So the jurist, rahimahullah, gave these examples of the impossibility. So we learn from this hadith, the slaughtering should not be made at locations where slaughtering is made for other than Allah. This is the reason why the author mentioned this in the first place. And the wisdom behind this is, number one, it leads to imitation to kuffar. So the conclusion of the chapter is we cannot slaughter where other than Allah is slaughtered for, because number one is the imitation to kuffar. Number two, it is misleading because whoever sees you slaughtering there where the disbelievers, the polytheists slaughter, they may think it's ibadah or permissible. Someone may see you and say, oh, so-and-so was slaughtered there, it's probably permissible. And you can mislead the people. And thirdly, those idolaters, mushrikeen, should be encouraged upon their action when they find someone imitating them. It means that if they see you doing it, they will feel encouraged to say that it's something good we're doing. And it creates doubt and confusion. Allah says, وَلَا يَطَؤُونَ مَوْطِئًا يُغِيدُ الْكُفَّارَ وَلَا يَنَالُونَ مِنْ عَدُوٍ نَيْلًا إِلَّا كُتِبَ لَهُمْ بِهِ عَمَلٌ صَالِحٌ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah says in the Quran, nor they take a step to raise the anger of the disbelievers, nor inflict any injury upon an enemy, but is written to their credit as the deed of righteousness. So Shaykh said, he had no doubt that promoting the idolaters is from the sinful actions, while raising their anger is from the good deeds. It means if they get angry at the Muslims for not doing that action, that's a good deed for us. The fact that we angry them by not doing that which they're doing. And the fact that they're not pleased by it, because Allah says here, it says, يَغِيدُ الْكُفَّارِ. Right? Which angers them. Allah says, كُتِبَ لَهُمْ بِهِ عَمَلٌ صَالِحٌ. So the chapter ends with this. But we also benefit from there. We have to avoid places where disobedience of Allah are being made, where there be shirk or ma'as. And this is something that's part of Islam. But we stay away from the people of disobedience. The people of disbelief and shirk who are misguiding the people and doing disobedience and doing that which does not please to Allah. The same way we also stay away from the places where such things occur. Well, it's not befitting for the Muslim to find themselves in places where they are sin and transgression. And they're not changing it, and they're not trying to correct it, and in fact staying there and being pleased with it. And in fact, as Muslims, especially in the issue of ibadah, we stay away from such places, and we try to frequent the places where the khair is happening. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. If anyone has any questions, that which you mentioned, they may ask, or add any benefits. Yes.
You stated that there are two times that we're not supposed to pray, which are when the sun rises or when the sun sets. So let's say if you wake up late for Fajr and like you saw the sun, I don't know how you could tell anyway, or like what you're supposed to do at that time.
It's a good question. If you wake up late for Fajr and you don't know if the sun is going to rise or it's not, or what time, you can check nowadays with our phones or these things to give us some estimation. And what you need to know is that in those kind of situations, you're in a state of durura, like you woke up late. You're not considered sinful if someone woke up late. And they didn't lead themselves to such situation. It means they didn't, they woke up and then they went back to their busy, the salah came in. And what happens then is, if it's too less to pray, it means not enough time to pray one rak'ah at such a time. It means if I cannot pray one rak'ah of the salah in this particular timing, because according to the timetable or the phone or whatever it is, it's saying it's going to come, let's say in 5 minutes or so, Allahu a'lam, then it's better to wait until the sun rises. You wait, then you pray. But if you wake up, there's sufficient time to catch one rak'ah, then you pray. Because it comes to Sahihain, Rasul sallallahu said, whoever catches one rak'ah, من أدرك الركعة من الفجر قبل طلوع الشمس, before the sun rises, فقد أدرك الفجر. He's caught the fajr. So if you have that enough time to pray that one rak'ah before the sun rises, you pray one rak'ah, and then even the second rak'ah, the sun is rising, you pray, then you're okay. Because you woke up this time. But there also comes to Hadith Bukhari Muslim, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Sahaba, they all woke up late together. All of them. They were in travel, and then Shaitan made them sleep deep and they woke up late. So Rasul, they waited, and sun rise, then they made their adhan, then they did their sunnah, then they did salah normally. So this also happens. Sometimes you wake up, it's not enough time, you wait. And the one who sleeps and they wake up late, then he's not sinful. Because he didn't, as long as he didn't lead himself to that, it means that he knew the salah. He's not like the one who salah time came in and he just went to nap. Not like this, right? Who went to sleep and he just قدر الله ما شاء فعل woke up late. Because there is a tafrid في النائم. Hadith Muslim comes in Abu Dawud, there's no sin among who's sleeping. من نام عن صلاته, whoever sleeps on the salah, فليصليها إذا ذكرها. And then pray when he remembers. So that's what the best thing to do. And the person, so he estimates, okay, can I not? If he's not sure, you err on that which is safer. Because you don't want to be in a situation where we're praying and we're prostrating at the same time, with the sun being risen, and then people worshipping, and the Prophet said, Hadith Muslim, the shaitan rises. Shaitan, he puts his, or the sun rises between the two horns of shaitan. So ulama interpret to me the shaitan, he puts his head in that direction, so the person who's prostrating that time actually is prostrating to him. That's what he wishes to intend. that you end up worshipping him in that situation. So you see such a plot, you try to avoid such things. So you make the judgment, Wallahu a'lam. Oh yeah, can anybody else? Yes.
Same thing with Asr and sunset.
Mm-hmm.
1 rak'ah.
Same thing. If you come and you see that you can do that 1 rak'ah, because now you're in the waqt of durura, waqt dururi, that you came, you delayed the Asr to the point where it's almost Maghrib. And that's the time where you have to pray. You have to pray Asr before Maghrib. The waqt al-ikhtiyar, the chosen time, is the earlier time. When the Jama'ah Muslimin is praying, the time comes in, it's the best time. So you find yourself, something happened, you got too busy, you slept, whatever it may be, and you end up then, you see, can I pray this 1 rak'ah for them? And then you pray. And then you go, and then you try not to do that next time too, to get to that point. Because we also know, if somebody's capable of praying earlier, but he waited, and then in the last second, tried to pray, then sometimes take a salatul munafiq. That's the salat munafiq. He sits back, waiting. Last second he gets up for rak'ah, doesn't even remember Allah in there, and he just done, and we don't want to be like that. But if it happens to you, that, we got busy, something happened, that you see, you look at that. Right? And so the same thing applies. And again, this is a situation of necessities. It's not the chosen position of person. So that's what you do, Allahu a'lam. Yeah.
So a prayer in general, any of the 5 daily prayers is accepted if you prayed 1 rak'ah before the time ends? Or?
Exactly, and that's the bare minimum for the one who's not able to pray, who's not praying on the proper time with the jama'ah, at the time when everybody's praying. It means he's not praying the earliest time, which is the best. So this person, if his salah to be accepted, you need to pray between their salah when it entered, before it exits. And the very minimum is that you pray the 1 rak'ah before it ends, because this is in Hadith Bukhari and Muslim. Some said same thing, whoever catches 1 rak'ah of Fajr before the sun rises, then he's caught the Fajr. Whoever catches 1 rak'ah of Asr before the sun sets, then he's caught the Asr. So we learned that this is like the finest line, that's at the end of it. Right? Yeah. So after that, when somebody missed all of this time, then he's considered missed the salah. The Fajr waqt, he's missed the salah, then he has to make qada. Yes.
So what is considered catching a rak'ah? Is it if the person goes into the court?
He has to pray the 1 rak'ah. He has to get the rak'ah down. That's it. Some I mentioned that even, I think, the sujood, but the rak'ah, he has to get the rak'ah in, then he's in. Right, so that's the thing. So issues like even if someone is not certain if he's going to pray a whole rak'ah or not, the error on that what to say. Because when you get to this situation, also we have to remember someone's in a necessity situation where he doesn't even know if he can catch a rak'ah or not. He's in necessity, error without what to say. So, for example, the Sahaba, they would delay. If they woke up that time, Fajr too late to be able to pray the salah, and they delayed it till they got up, and then they prayed. Because the one who was sleeping, he's not held accountable when he didn't do it. So the issue is try to get the whole rak'ah in. This is the safest thing. But obviously, you have to look into the situation, and somebody should always be keen to always try to make sure they're praying salah on his time. It's a must to be praying salah on his time. It's very important. We have to emphasize that.
So, when it comes to differences of opinions about the authenticity of a hadith, how does somebody make a conclusion, on what to do based on that? So, an example would be like the hadith about reading Surah Al-Mulk every night, as an example. Like, if many scholars have differences of opinion on whether this is authentic or not, what does a person that heard both differences of opinion do?
It's a good question. When it comes to authenticity of hadith, then a person himself needs to look at his or her own situation. If they are a person of knowledge who knows the hadith science, mustalah al-hadith, they studied this subject, they're able to look at the chain narration or the research. The ulama said this kind of caliber person has to make a rule by himself. They make the judgment which side is da'if or sahih. So they are not allowed to say, okay, or it's not preferred that they say, okay, Shaykh Fulan so-and-so said, I'll just go with them. Because they have more ability. And that's the best thing someone can do. But not a lot of people are not at that level where they can just look at this, both research and say, okay, this hadith, I agree with the Shaykh, this hadith da'if. So what they do, then you go with some imam, muhaddith, you trust and you rely upon. So in our time, Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, is the most prolific and prevalent, rahimahullah, the muhaddiqeen of hadith, and he is the one who, even the ulama, they rely upon him. And so if we following his checking, then you consistently rely upon his checking. But we don't also want the situation where somebody he may rely upon others all the time, other people every time. In that situation, everything becomes sahih, right? Someone may tasheeh have some hadith, and it's true, and it happens. So, for example, we may see a hadith, say, for example, Shaykh Al-Albani, we can then, Shaykh Al-Albani may authentic, or Shaykh Al-Albani is da'if, Shaykh Al-Albani is sahih. Ahmad Shakir said it's sahih, Hajj said da'if. Then what happens if you yourself don't have a principle? Everything becomes sahih. Because you go, who makes a sahih? Okay, I'm with him. And what happens then? You collect with yourself a lot of confusion and contradiction. So Shaykh Al-Bani himself was asked this kind of question. He said the best thing to do is the same thing. Someone knows. That is what he does. He needs to go and research it himself. If someone is not able, then he goes to a Shaykh who's reliable. This is not considered blind following. This is trusting the ulama al-ilm, because this is a person you cannot do more than that. Right? And this is what is advisable, and it should always be known that someone has to make sure that he follows the predecessors, those who have knowledge of the subject. But again, those who relies upon, try to be consistent in it. So, like example, Shaykh Al-Bani, he took the majority. Comparatively, he took more hadith than anybody else. So somebody is not able to research a lot or not able, then he will go with him from Allah in many of his techniques and he'll be in a good state. So the issue of Surah Al-Mulk, that's what he would do. If he doesn't know anything about hadith or doesn't know how it's authenticated, if he's able to research it, then he will open both sides, check what the argument is, and check is the criticism for the weakness of hadith established on that end. If it's not, then he will make his own judgment. Right? So Allah Alam, but that's what someone should do. And it's important to emphasize relying upon one shaykh or one checker of hadith consistently, so that someone doesn't end up in the confusion of having everything sahih or everything da'if or whatever it may be. Right? Because then again, you're not really being sincere. Right? So then you end up weakening what you feel like is weak or sahih and you feel like it's sahih. You don't have anything, right? And then, yes.
So again, what is the difference between halaf and nadar?
The difference we said now is that halaf itself, it comes with a more specific wording. So wallahi, wa billahi, wa tallahi, the three letters of half. Whereas the oath is more spacious. So you don't have to use those words necessarily. You can use other words like by Allah, or nadartu ala shay, I made another for something. Or upon me is another for Allah. Or, ahad Allah. Ahad Allah means I've made a covenant with Allah or I vowed for him something. So Shaykh Atim said the wordings are more spacious. But when it comes to the rulings, they're quite similar in that both of them would entail there needs to be some type of expiation. So that's the difference. One is more specific than the other. Right? And that's why then he made qiyas between the two. So now we see that. Yeah. And also we mentioned that the rulings for another half are slightly different than the rulings of another. So for example, certain times the half oath can be applicable, other times is not. So for example, one of the conditions for an oath to be acceptable is that you're doing it for that which is in the mustaqbal, in the future. So for example, wallahi, I'm going to go to masjid tomorrow. That's applicable now. If someone said, wallahi, I didn't go, does that count? Is that expiation needed for that one? No, you don't need expiation for that one. Expiation in relation to that which is coming. Now it's that path. Sometimes it happens, people are playing sports. Wallahi, I went and didn't go in, this, that. Everyone's arguing, and then someone comes and says, brother, I have to get expiation. Everybody said wallahi. Not everyone, everybody was in there. Now we say this is not, because it already happened. So that's not. But in the future, then yes. So there's different rules, right? So this is applicable. Wallahu a'lam. You have the question, yes?
Building on his question. What's the hukm of a person that doesn't really follow any method, who just takes the easiest, every single situation takes the easiest, whatever you say?
This is very dangerous. When the ulama, they spoke about this in the books of fiqh, the person who just follows all opinions. He just follows all the rukhsat, allowances of every alim. And the ulama salaf will mention the person who does this, who follows the rukhs, allowances, every alim has a mistake. Or something, a ruling he held which is weaker than other correct ruling. And this is a human being. You see, every human being you see will yukhti. He gets it right, gets it wrong. You have to know that. So if someone has a job, is collecting all these different allowances, the ulama salaf said he's going to become fasiq, this person, a wicked person. Because at the end of the day, he's going to end up drinking, listening to music, right? Having temporary marriages. What's left? Living the Western life. It's all kind of things. And he's going to have an opinion of each one. And that's why this is a danger when somebody is just looking for the easy way. Because what happens then, you're not looking for the haqq. You have to look for the haqq. Second thing is that following with madhab does not necessitate somebody who doesn't follow madhab will end up like this. For there is a qawa'id, usul al-fiqh, qawa'id al-fiqh, and the ulama of al-hadith, the ulama of salaf, they accepted all of them, the principle of study, manhaj of studying the deen. So they wouldn't say, for example, if someone didn't follow Shafi'i or Malik or Abu Hanif or Ahmed, this person now is automatically not a view of knowledge. No, they had the qawa'id. They differ on some of them, but they agree with most of it. Now, what happens is they study the deen the right way. So not some person, unprincipled person gets going and everything becomes halal, haram, he's all over the place. No, it's not like that. And so what we see is that some people are mistaken, that if you don't follow madhab, you will have confusion. No, we have the qawa'id and the usul and the deen. You study the knowledge, but what we don't not allow, and the ulama warning against it, is following the mistakes, the allowance of the ulama. In the books of fiqh, Usul al-Fiqh, they warn against that specifically. Some who are just looking for any easy fatwa for permissibility. Because at the end of the day, it's not haqq anymore. You're looking for the rukhas and you're making excuses. And we know that when you're doing that, this is when the path to destruction. But the prophets already prophesied that the time will come. He said, "La akhsha alaykum al-khata'a." I'm not scared that you will make mistakes, but I can akhsha alaykum al-amad. I'm scared you will do things deliberately, on purpose. And today we have that. Someone knows it's sin. In your heart, you already know you're on the wrong opinion when you take this opinion. But someone says, yes, I'm going to go with it because it's allowed, and I like it. And the problem with this is that this is doing it on purpose. And the second thing also is that we need to be fair. When there are differences, we look at things from the perspective of the religion. So we have two different fatwas with different perspectives to get to the usul. So a person has to have some knowledge as well, though, the principles of deen, hadith, fiqh, tawhid, so he can study what is going on. Now he just looks at the two fatwas and says, right, I'll take the easier of the two. That's not the approach of the deen, right?